7 years of marriage destroyed by a shocking betrayal. A man exposes his wife's double life, and what he does next will not leave you indifferent. Lies, heartbreak, and brutal revenge unfold in this stunning story that you simply won't believe. I've been married to my wife, Emma, for 7 years. She's sharp, beautiful, and confident, the kind of woman who walks into a room and commands attention. I used to feel lucky just to be the guy standing beside her, but lately, I've started to wonder if I was just naive. For the most part, our marriage was great. Sure, we had arguments, but nothing out of the ordinary. Emma has always been ambitious, working late nights and attending networking events. She said it was part of building her career, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I was her biggest cheerleader, or so I thought. The first red flag wasn't obvious, at least not to me. It started with her phone. She suddenly became overly protective of it, always flipping it over when she set it down, guarding it like it held state secrets. She brushed off my jokes about her being glued to it, saying work was hectic and clients needed quick responses. Then came the late nights, which became more frequent. She always had an explanation, a project deadline, an important client dinner, or a team meeting that ran late. She even joked about how her boss was a slave driver, and I'd laugh along with her, thinking nothing of it. But the first real gut punch came when I was reviewing our bank statements. Emma and I have a joint account, something we've shared since we got married. I don't typically check it unless there's a reason, but I was trying to budget for a trip we've been planning. That's when I noticed a string of charges that didn't make sense. Dinners at restaurants I didn't recognize, charges to luxury boutiques, and an Airbnb booking in a town she never mentioned visiting. At first, I thought maybe it was work-related, or something she'd forgotten to tell me about. I even convinced myself it could be fraud. So I brought it up casually, hoping for a reasonable explanation. "Hey, babe, I noticed some weird charges on the account," I said. "Were you in Pinewood last month? There's an Airbnb charge here." Her face froze for a split second before she laughed. "Oh, that must have been work. I think I covered for one of my coworkers and booked something for them. They paid me back in cash." It didn't sit right with me. The tone of her voice, the way she avoided eye contact, it all felt off. But I didn't push it. I wanted to trust her, to believe that she wasn't lying to me. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention, not because I was trying to catch her in something, but because I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I'd ask her how her day went, what she'd been up to, and her answers started to feel rehearsed, like she was reciting a script. The final straw came when I found a receipt crumpled up in her gym bag. It was for a dinner for two at an upscale restaurant, one I'd been trying to convince her we should visit together. The date on the receipt? It matched one of her supposed work dinners. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every suspicious moment, every flimsy excuse, every odd charge on our account. I wanted to confront her, but I also knew I needed more proof. Something solid. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I opened her laptop, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. My hands were shaking as I typed in the password. Our anniversary date, of all things. Her email was open, and I saw a string of messages between her and a guy named Chris. The subject lines alone were enough to make my stomach drop. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I didn't need to read the details to know what was happening, but I did. I needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. And that's when I decided. If she thought she could treat me like a fool, she had another thing coming. After finding those emails, my body felt like it was running on autopilot. Numb. It wasn't just Chris's words that stung. It was hers. She wasn't just complicit. She was enthusiastic. There were mentions of missing him, counting down the days until their next getaway, and, the cherry on top, an attached photo of them together. They were smiling, standing in front of a sunset-lit cabin, a cabin I recognized. Years ago, Emma and I had gone on a weekend trip to that very same place. It was one of the most romantic weekends of our lives, or so I thought. I remember how she looked in the glow of the firelight, how she promised we'd return there someday when life slowed down. But now, she'd used that same memory as the backdrop for her affair. That photo wasn't just a betrayal. It was a knife twist. I scrolled further, my hands trembling, uncovering more of their dirty little secrets. They were planning another weekend together in 2 weeks. Another business trip. She even sent him a Venmo request from our joint account to split the cost of the Airbnb. I shut the laptop and leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. There was no doubt now. Emma wasn't just lying. She was living a double life, using me to fund it all. But here's the thing. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The first step was to keep playing dumb. If she even suspected that I knew, she'd find a way to twist the story, to gaslight me into thinking I was overreacting or misunderstanding her intentions. No, I needed to gather more ammunition and figure out the best way to hit her where it hurt. Later that day, I called my friend Jason. He's one of those no-nonsense, ride-or-die guys who tells you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. I told him everything, the emails, the charges, the lies. Man, Jason said after I finished, this is next-level scummy. She's not just cheating. She's rubbing your face in it. You gotta do something, but don't act on impulse. You want this to sting. He was right. I didn't just want a clean break. I wanted her to feel the same shock and devastation she'd handed me. The next day, I started doing my research. I went through all our financial records, combing through years of statements to see if there were other surprises she'd hidden. Sure enough, there were more. Hotel stays, dinners, and even a jewelry store purchase that definitely wasn't for me. I printed everything out and filed it away in a manila envelope labeled evidence. Then I reached out to a private investigator. Jason had a guy, a retired cop named Frank who specialized in this kind of thing. Frank was efficient, discreet, and had a knack for uncovering what people thought they'd hidden. Within a week, Frank had everything I needed. Photos of Emma and Chris together, timestamps of their meetings, even surveillance footage of them kissing in a parking lot. It was undeniable proof of her betrayal. But here's where the plan started to take shape. Emma thought she was smart. She thought she could juggle her lies and keep me in the dark. What she didn't know was that I'd already contacted a lawyer. Turns out, Illinois isn't a no-fault divorce state. And with the evidence I had, I could make things very uncomfortable for her. But I wasn't just going to hit her with legal paperwork. That would be too easy, too private. No, I wanted her lies to unravel in real time. One evening, as Emma sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I casually mentioned that I'd been thinking about planning a romantic getaway for us. Her eyes lit up, probably because she thought I was still clueless. That sounds amazing, she said, leaning over to kiss me on the cheek. Where were you thinking? Oh, I don't know, I replied, pretending to think. Maybe that little cabin we went to a few years ago. It's been too long since we had a weekend to ourselves. Her face froze for just a split second before she recovered. That's a great idea. I'd love that. Inside, I was seething, but I kept my expression calm. Let her lie, I thought. Let her dig the hole even deeper. As the weekend of her next business trip approached, I put the final touches on my plan. I wanted her to believe everything was normal, that I was blissfully unaware, while setting the stage for her ultimate downfall. And let me tell you, when the pieces fell into place, it would be a spectacle. The week leading up to Emma's business trip was excruciating. Every time I looked at her, every time she smiled at me or called me babe, I wanted to explode. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to keep my composure because if she even sniffed suspicion, the entire plan would fall apart. I started dropping little hints, though, just to see how far she'd go to keep the lie intact. Hey, what's the agenda for your work trip? I asked one evening, casually sipping my coffee. She didn't miss a beat. Oh, just meetings all day, then probably a team dinner. I'll be too tired for anything fun. It was infuriating how easily the lies rolled off her tongue, but I just nodded, pretending to be disinterested. The night before she was supposed to leave, I upped the ante. While she was packing, I walked into the bedroom and leaned against the doorframe, watching her fold clothes into her suitcase. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? I asked. I've got some vacation days saved up. I could take a couple of days off and join you. We could make it a little getaway. Her hands froze mid-fold, and she turned to me with that overly sweet smile she always used when she was trying to cover something up. That's sweet, but it's really just a work thing. You'd be bored out of your mind sitting in the hotel all day. Yeah, I guess you're right, I said, shrugging. Maybe next time. Inside, I was screaming. She didn't even flinch. The morning she left, I kissed her goodbye at the door, acting every bit the loving, clueless husband. "Have a great trip," I said, forcing myself to smile. "Text me when you get there." "I will," she said, flashing that same fake smile she'd been giving me for weeks. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I got to work. The first stop was our bank. I withdrew half the funds from our joint account and moved them into a separate account under my name. I wasn't about to let her use my money to fund her fling anymore. Next, I called Frank, the private investigator, to let him know the plan was moving forward. He'd already confirmed the Airbnb reservation and had photos of Chris's car parked outside the cabin. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Frank asked, his voice cautious. "Absolutely," I said. "She deserves every bit of what's coming." The final step was contacting Emma's boss. I had debated this one for a while, but in the end, I decided that if she wanted to use work as her cover, it was only fair her lies came back to haunt her. I didn't give away all the details, just enough for her boss to know that Emma's work trip wasn't exactly professional. On the evening of her first night at the cabin, I drove up there myself. I parked far enough away so they wouldn't see my car and walked the rest of the way, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to feel: rage, sadness, betrayal, but all I felt was cold determination. Frank had tipped me off about the layout of the cabin, and I knew there was a large window overlooking the living room. When I crept through the woods and peered inside, it was like something out of a bad movie. There they were, sitting on the couch, wine glasses in hand, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Emma was leaning against Chris, her head on his shoulder, while he stroked her hair. I pulled out my phone and took a few photos, my hands steady as a rock. The final touch was the small package I had prepared. I crept up to the front porch, careful not to make a sound, and placed it on the welcome mat. Inside was a printed copy of every email, text message, and photo I had collected, along with a short note. "Enjoy your weekend. It's your last one as Mrs. Thompson." Then, I knocked on the door, just loud enough to get their attention, and sprinted back into the woods. I didn't stick around to see their reaction. I didn't need to. Driving back home, I felt an odd sense of calm. The trap had been sprung, and now all I had to do was wait for the fallout. But the real fireworks were yet to come. When Emma returned home 2 days later, I was already prepared. I had spent the weekend tying up loose ends, consulting my lawyer again, documenting every last detail of her infidelity, and, most importantly, rehearsing what I would say. She walked in late that Sunday evening, dragging her suitcase behind her like she was coming back from a legitimate work trip. Her face lit up when she saw me sitting on the couch, but I could see the nervousness beneath her smile. "Hey, babe," she said, dropping her bag near the door. "You wouldn't believe how exhausting this weekend was. I'm so glad to be home." I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch until she started to fidget. "Is something wrong?" she asked, feigning concern. "Oh, nothing," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Just wondering how your work trip went." Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "It was fine. Pretty boring, honestly. Just a lot of meetings and networking." I leaned back on the couch, crossing my arms. "That's interesting because I could have sworn your meetings took place at a cabin with Chris." Her face went pale. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice higher pitched than usual. I stood up, keeping my gaze locked on her. "I know, Emma. I know everything. The emails, the Airbnb, the charges on our account. You've been lying to me for months." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in our entire relationship, she was completely speechless. "You thought you were so clever, didn't you?" I continued, my voice rising. "Using me to fund your little love nest, lying to my face while you ran off with him. Did you even feel guilty? Or was it all just some sick game to you?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't about to let them sway me. Not this time. "Michael, I can explain," she said, her voice trembling. "Oh, please do," I said, gesturing for her to continue. "I'd love to hear your explanation for why you've been sneaking around with another man while pretending to be my wife." She hesitated, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to come up with a lie that would get her out of this. Finally, she said, "It wasn't what you think. Chris is just a friend, and—" I cut her off, laughing bitterly. "A friend? You expect me to believe that after everything I've seen? The emails, Emma, the photos. I watched you two at the cabin. Don't insult me by pretending this was innocent." Her shoulders sagged, and she finally stopped trying to deny it. "It was a mistake," she said quietly. "I wasn't thinking clearly, and I got caught up in something I couldn't control. But it didn't mean anything. I love you, Michael. I always have." I shook my head, disgusted. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me you love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me, betrayed me, and made me feel like a fool in my own home." Tears streamed down her face now, but I felt nothing. "Michael, please," she begged. "Let's talk about this. We can work through it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just don't give up on us." I stared at her, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "There is no us anymore, Emma. You killed at the moment you decided he was worth more than your family." She sank to the floor, sobbing, but I didn't move to comfort her. Instead, I pulled out the manila envelope I had prepared and tossed it onto the coffee table. "This is everything," I said coldly. "The emails, the photos, the receipts. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and the divorce papers are being drawn up as we speak. Oh, and don't bother trying to stay in this house. Your name isn't on the deed, and I've already changed the locks." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of panic. "You can't do this. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." I didn't stick around to hear her response. I walked out of the room, grabbed my keys, and left the house. As I drove away, I felt an odd mixture of sadness and relief. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but at least now I could finally breathe again. I spent the night at Jason's place. He'd been my rock through all this, offering his spare room without hesitation when I told him what went down. "Did she even try to deny it?" he asked as we sat in his living room, a couple of beers on the table between us. "Oh, she tried," I said, shaking my head. The whole "it didn't mean anything" line, like that's supposed to make it better. She didn't even look shocked, just desperate. I think she knew this day would come. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Good riddance, man. You deserve better." I nodded, but the truth was, I didn't feel relief yet. There was still too much to process, too much fallout to deal with. Emma and I shared a life, a home, a network of friends who would undoubtedly find out soon. And then there was Chris. The next morning, I woke up to several missed calls and texts from Emma. "Emma, please, Michael, just talk to me. We can fix this. Emma, I'll move out if that's what you want, but don't make any decisions yet. Emma, I made a mistake. I know that now. I'm begging you." I didn't respond to any of them. What was the point? She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. Instead, I called Frank to check in. "Got anything on Chris?" I asked, pacing around Jason's guest room. Frank chuckled darkly. "Oh, I've got plenty. Turns out your boy's a serial cheater. He's been divorced twice, and both times it was because he couldn't keep it in his pants. I even found a couple of restraining orders from ex-girlfriends. Real charmer." "Perfect," I said, a plan forming in my mind. "Can you send me all the details?" "Already on it," Frank said. By midday, I was back at the house, determined to pack up some of Emma's things and get them out of my sight. When I pulled into the driveway, her car wasn't there, but I noticed something that made my blood boil. A different car parked out front. I recognized it immediately. Chris. My hands clenched into fists as I walked up to the door. I half expected to find it locked, but when I pushed it open, I was greeted by the sound of voices coming from the living room. "Emma, you don't need to let him do this to you," Chris was saying. His voice was smooth, cocky, and it grated on my nerves. "You have rights, you know. He can't just kick you out." I stepped into the room, and the smug look on his face vanished the second he saw me. "Well, isn't this cozy?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Emma jumped to her feet, her eyes wide. "Michael, I didn't think you'd be back so soon." Clearly, I said, my gaze flicking to Chris, who had the nerve to look defiant. Listen, man, Chris said, holding up his hands like he was trying to defuse the situation. I think we should all just calm down and talk about this. Calm down? I laughed bitterly. That's rich, coming from the guy who's been screwing my wife behind my back. Emma stepped forward, her hands outstretched as if to stop me from doing something rash. Michael, please, let's not do this right now. Oh, we're doing this, I said, pulling out my phone. You see, Chris, I've got a nice little folder full of evidence that shows exactly what you two have been up to. And you'll be thrilled to know I've already sent copies to your boss and your ex-wife. His face turned ghostly pale. You did what? You heard me, I said, my voice low and steady. You've been playing with fire, and now you're going to burn. And as for you, Emma, I turned to her. I hope he's worth it, because you've officially lost everything. Chris bolted not long after that, muttering something about needing to sort this out. Emma stayed, though, tears streaming down her face as she begged me to forgive her. I know I don't deserve it, she sobbed, but I can't lose you, Michael. Please. I stared at her for a long moment, my heart aching despite everything. But then I remembered the emails, the lies, the look on her face when she thought she'd gotten away with it. I already gave you everything, I said quietly, and you threw it away. We're done, Emma. That evening, I filed the divorce papers and had them served to her the next day. It was over, officially, but the story wasn't finished yet. After serving the divorce papers, I thought Emma would retreat, lick her wounds, and let things play out in court. But no, that wasn't her style. Instead, she doubled down. The first sign of trouble came through mutual friends. Jason called me a few days after the papers were served. Hey man, you're not gonna like this, he said. What now? I sighed, already bracing myself. She's been talking to people, saying you were controlling, that you pushed her into this. I felt a white-hot anger rising in my chest. She's seriously trying to play the victim here? Yep, Jason said grimly. She's telling anyone who'll listen that the affair was just an escape from your overbearing behavior. I laughed bitterly. Overbearing? I gave her everything she ever asked for, and she still went behind my back. How is that overbearing? Jason didn't have an answer, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. Look, man, people know you. The ones who matter won't buy into her lies. But you should prepare yourself. It's gonna get messy. Messy didn't even begin to cover it. Over the next week, I started receiving calls and texts from people I hadn't heard from in months, some offering their support, others asking me outright if the rumors were true. I stayed calm, refusing to get drawn into Emma's game. Instead, I let the evidence do the talking. The photos, emails, and financial records I had collected painted a crystal-clear picture of her betrayal. And when I handed them over to my lawyer, he assured me that Emma's attempts to smear me would fall flat in court. She's desperate, my lawyer said during our first meeting. It's classic deflection. Don't engage with her. Let her dig her own grave. Meanwhile, Frank, the private investigator, delivered some unexpected news about Chris. You're gonna love this, he said, sounding almost giddy. Turns out Chris's employer has a strict morality clause. They found out about the affair, thanks to your little package, and he's already been let go. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Chris made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. And that's not all, Frank continued. His ex-wife has filed to revisit their custody agreement, citing his pattern of infidelity as a reason to limit his access to their kids. Good for her, I said. He deserves every bit of it. Despite the chaos, I managed to maintain my focus. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy into something productive. My coworkers were supportive, offering words of encouragement and distracting me when I needed it. But the nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of it all. I kept wondering how I hadn't seen it coming, how I could have been so blind. Jason, ever the blunt friend, gave me a reality check one evening. Dude, you're human, he said. You trusted your wife. That's not a weakness. It's what you're supposed to do. She's the one who blew it, not you. I nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the marriage. It was about the life I thought we'd built together. A week after Chris lost his job, Emma showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking disheveled and hollow. It was a stark contrast to the confident, put-together woman I had fallen in love with. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "can we talk?" I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "There's nothing left to talk about." "Please," she begged. "I just need you to hear me out." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, the same spot where she had lied to me so many times. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live with the way things ended between us." I leaned against the wall, keeping my distance. "You're not sorry for what you did, Emma. You're sorry you got caught." She shook her head, her hands gripping her knees. "No, that's not true. I was selfish and stupid, and I hate myself for it. I ruined everything, and I don't know how to fix it." "There is no fixing this," I said bluntly. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Can't we at least try? For everything we had?" I laughed bitterly. "What we had? You mean the life you pretended to care about while you were sneaking around with him? No, Emma, you destroyed that, and you destroyed us." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed into her hands, but I felt nothing. The pain and anger that had consumed me for weeks were gone, replaced by a cold detachment. "I loved you," I said quietly, "and you threw it away like it meant nothing. So now, you get nothing. Goodbye, Emma." I didn't look back as she left, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. But the story wasn't over yet. The final blow was still to come. In the days following Emma's tearful exit from the house, I kept my distance. No more calls, no more texts, no more conversations. My lawyer handled everything, and I channeled my energy into rebuilding my life. But Emma wasn't done. A mutual friend, Lisa, stopped by unannounced one afternoon. She sat at my kitchen table, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen her. "I don't know how to say this, Michael," she began, "but Emma's been telling people things." "What things?" I asked, already bracing for the worst. Lisa hesitated. "That you were abusive. Not physically, but emotionally. That you controlled her, isolated her from her friends, and made her feel trapped. She's trying to spin the affair as her way of breaking free." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Are you serious? She's the one who cheated, lied, and used me, and now she's playing the victim?" Lisa nodded, her face etched with concern. "She's desperate, Michael. People are starting to talk. Some believe her, some don't. But you should know, it's out there." I took a deep breath, the anger simmering just below the surface. "Thanks for telling me, Lisa. I appreciate it." "You're a good guy, Michael," she said, placing a hand on mine. "The people who know you won't believe her lies. But if there's anything I can do to help, let me know." That night, I called my lawyer to discuss the situation. "This is exactly why we document everything," he said. "Don't worry, we'll address this in court. Her claims won't hold up against the evidence you've collected." "But what about the damage to my reputation?" I asked. "She's already poisoned the well with some of our friends." "We can't control what people believe," he said, his tone firm but sympathetic. "But we can ensure she faces the consequences legally. Stay the course, Michael. The truth will come out." The final court hearing came sooner than I expected. By then, Emma had found a lawyer willing to take her case, but it was clear from the start that she was on shaky ground. My lawyer presented everything: the emails, the financial records, the photos, and even testimony from Frank, the private investigator. It was an airtight case, and Emma's attempts to paint me as controlling and abusive fell flat under cross-examination. Her lawyer tried to argue that the affair was a result of emotional neglect on my part, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Infidelity is not a valid justification for breaching the trust of a marriage," the judge said, his voice stern. "Mr. Thompson has provided ample evidence of Mrs. Thompson's misconduct, and the court finds in his favor." In the end, Emma was left with nothing. The prenuptial agreement ensured that she forfeited any claim to the house, my savings, or any shared assets. She walked out of the courtroom pale and defeated, her lawyer whispering something in her ear that I didn't care to overhear. But the final blow wasn't just about the legal victory. A few days later, I received a call from a mutual acquaintance who worked at Emma's company. "Hey, Michael," he said cautiously, "I thought you'd want to know. Emma's been let go." "Let go?" I asked, surprised. "Why?" "Word got around about the affair," he said. "Her boss wasn't happy about how she used company events as a cover for personal escapades. Apparently, it was the last straw in a string of questionable decisions." I thanked him for the information and hung up, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and pity. Emma had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. But it was still hard to see the woman I once loved spiral so far. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I reconnected with old friends, started hitting the gym again, and even began exploring new hobbies. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of the betrayal still pressed down on me, but I was moving forward. As for Emma, I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. She'd moved in with a friend, was struggling to find steady work, and was reportedly still trying to patch things up with Chris. I couldn't help but shake my head at the irony. She'd risked everything for him, and now they were both dealing with the fallout. One night, as I sat on my back porch watching the sunset, Jason joined me with a couple of beers. "You did it," he said, handing me a bottle. "Did what?" I asked. "You survived," he said simply. I nodded, taking a sip of my beer. "Barely." He clinked his bottle against mine. "Barely still counts. Cheers to new beginnings." For the first time in months, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. The weeks after the final court hearing felt surreal, like I was finally stepping out of a fog that had consumed my life for months. The house was quieter now, but it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of Emma's lies suffocating me. I kept myself busy, working on the house and rediscovering hobbies I had neglected during the marriage. Painting, woodworking, even dabbling in photography again. It was like reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Jason, being Jason, decided I needed to get back out there, despite my protests. "Dude," he said one Friday night, shoving a flyer in my face, "there's a charity event downtown this weekend. Casual, low-key. Come with me." I rolled my eyes. "Jason, the last thing I want to do is go to some random event full of people I don't know." "Exactly," he said. "You don't know them. No baggage, no awkward conversations about your divorce, just a fresh start." He had a point. Part 8. A glimpse of peace. The weeks after the final court hearing felt surreal, like I was finally stepping out of a fog that had consumed my life for months. The house was quieter now, but it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of Emma's lies suffocating me. I kept myself busy, working on the house and rediscovering hobbies I had neglected during the marriage. Painting, woodworking, even dabbling in photography again. It was like reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd lost. Jason, being Jason, decided I needed to get back out there, despite my protests. "Dude," he said one Friday night, shoving a flyer in my face, "there's a charity event downtown this weekend. Casual, low-key. Come with me." I rolled my eyes. "Jason, the last thing I want to do is go to some random event full of people I don't know." "Exactly," he said. "You don't know them. No baggage, no awkward conversations about your divorce, just a fresh start." He had a point. The event was held at a small art gallery, the kind of place Emma used to drag me to when we were still pretending to be happy. At first, I felt out of place, but then I started wandering around, letting myself get lost in the artwork. That's when I met her. Her name was Claire. She was standing in front of a vibrant, abstract painting, her head tilted as if trying to decipher its meaning. "Looks like someone had a bad day with a paintbrush," I joked, gesturing to the chaotic splashes of color. She turned to me, smiling. Or maybe they were just trying to say something they didn't have words for. There was something about her, something easy and genuine. We started talking about the painting, which led to a discussion about art, and then life in general. She told me she worked as a graphic designer, that she loved hiking, and that she was at the event because her friend had begged her to come. By the end of the night, we were laughing like old friends, and when she handed me her business card, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Claire more than I expected. I wasn't sure if I was ready for anything serious, but I decided to take a chance. I texted her, suggesting coffee, and to my surprise, she said yes. Our first date was nothing fancy, just two people sitting in a cozy cafe, sharing stories and laughter. She didn't ask about my past right away, and when I finally did tell her about the divorce, she didn't flinch. "I've been there," she said, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's hard, but it doesn't define you." Her words stayed with me long after the date ended. Meanwhile, Emma continued to hover on the edges of my life. She still tried to contact me occasionally, mostly through emails now that her phone plan was cut off. They ranged from apologetic pleas to angry rants about how I'd ruined her life. I ignored them all. Jason, however, couldn't resist keeping tabs on her. "You're not gonna believe this," he said one evening as we sat in my living room. "Chris dumped her." I raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "Yup. Apparently, he couldn't handle the fallout from the affair. Lost his job, his reputation, and now her too. Guess karma works fast sometimes." I didn't feel any satisfaction in hearing that. If anything, I felt pity for both of them. They'd burned their lives to the ground for a fleeting fantasy, and now they were paying the price. As the months went by, my life slowly began to rebuild itself. Claire and I grew closer, though we were careful not to rush anything. She understood my hesitation, and for the first time, I felt like I could truly be myself with someone. One evening, as we walked through the park near my house, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you regret it?" "Regret what?" I asked. "Marrying her. Going through all of this." I thought about it for a moment before answering. "No," I said finally, "because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have learned what I'm capable of surviving, or what I really deserve in a partner. It hurt like hell, but it taught me something important." She smiled, slipping her hand into mine. "Sounds like you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself alone in the house one quiet Saturday morning. The air was crisp, and sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the hardwood floor. Life had started to feel normal again. Different, but normal. Then, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I did, there she was. Emma. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow, and she clutched a small box in her hands. "Michael," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I sighed, stepping aside to let her in. I had no desire to rekindle old wounds, but there was something final about the way she carried herself, and curiosity got the better of me. She sat down at the dining table, placing the box in front of her. I stayed standing, keeping my distance. "I wanted to bring you this," she said, sliding the box across the table. "What is it?" I asked, skeptical. "Everything I took for granted," she said, her voice breaking. "The photos of us, our wedding album, the letters you wrote me when we first started dating. I thought maybe you'd want them back." I opened the box, and sure enough, it was full of memories I'd almost forgotten about. Seeing them again stirred something deep within me. Pain, nostalgia, maybe even a flicker of the love we once shared. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "I do," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was selfish, Michael. I hurt you in ways I can never take back. And I know you'll never forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. For a moment, I felt the anger and resentment start to melt away, replaced by something softer: acceptance. "I believe you," I said finally, "and I forgive you, Emma. Not for your sake, but for mine. I need to let go of all of this if I'm ever going to move forward." She nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you. That's all I needed to hear." She stood, lingering for a moment before heading to the door. As she turned to leave, she looked back one last time. "I hope you find someone who gives you the love you deserve," she said. "And I hope someday I can forgive myself too." And then she was gone. After Emma left, I sat alone with the box for a long time. I went through each photo, each letter, letting the memories wash over me one last time. There was pain, yes, but also a strange sense of closure. I didn't need to hold on to these relics of the past anymore. They were a part of who I was, but they didn't define me. The next morning, I met Claire for coffee. She greeted me with her warm smile, the one that always managed to pull me out of my own head. "How are you feeling?" she asked, sensing the weight on my shoulders. "Lighter," I said honestly. "I think I finally closed the door on that chapter of my life." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Good. Because you deserve to be happy, Michael. Really happy." Looking at her, I realized that maybe I already was. Life wasn't perfect, and I still had scars, but I was finally free. Free to rebuild, free to love, and free to live on my own terms. And that, I realized, was more than enough.